3 days after I moved into my son-in-law's house, the man who had installed the security system called me out of nowhere. His voice was low, careful, like someone talking through a closed door. "Mr. Callahan," he said, "I need you to listen to me very carefully. I work at Sentinel Home Systems. I was the technician who set up the cameras at your son-in-law's property 2 years ago. I forgot to remove my personal access credentials when the job was done." He paused. "I've seen things on that system I was never supposed to see. You need to come to my shop today. Don't tell your son-in-law. Don't mention my name to anyone. And whatever you do not go into the basement alone." Before I could say a word, he gave me an address and hung up. "I'm grateful you're here with me today. Before I tell you what happened next, let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is right now. I promise you'll want to hear every word of this. My name is Robert Callahan. I'm 63 years old, recently retired from 35 years as a certified public accountant in Dayton, Ohio. I spent my career reading numbers, finding inconsistencies, following paper trails that other people hoped no one would notice. I was good at it. My wife Margaret used to say I could smell a lie from across a room. She passed away 14 months ago from a stroke, quietly, in our bedroom on a Tuesday morning while I was making coffee downstairs. After that, the house we'd shared for 31 years became a place I didn't know how to live in anymore. Our daughter, Claire, had gone missing 2 years before Margaret died. She was 26 when she disappeared. The police called it a voluntary absence. They said she'd left her husband, my son-in-law, of her own choice, that she'd taken some clothes and her car, and that there were text messages from her phone saying she needed space and didn't want to be found. My son-in-law, a man named Derek, stood in my living room and cried, real tears, and told me Claire had been struggling with depression for years, that she'd stopped taking her medication, that this wasn't the first time she'd threatened to disappear. He had paperwork, a letter from her therapist, copies of prescriptions she'd stopped filling. He was thorough. I didn't believe him. Not completely. But grief does something to a person's ability to fight, and Margaret believed him, and she was in no condition for me to bring our family more pain. So I swallowed what I felt. I told myself Claire had her reasons. I told myself she would call when she was ready. I told myself the alternative was too dark to consider. After Margaret passed, Derek came to me. He sat across the kitchen table in my house and said he was worried about me living alone. He said Claire would have wanted him to look after me. He had a large house in Westerville, a suburb north of Columbus. 4 bedrooms, more space than he needed. He said I should come live with him, that it would be good for both of us, that we could grieve together. He even helped me pack. I moved in on a Saturday. By Monday morning, the security technician called. His shop was on Morse Road, a narrow storefront between a tire place and a Vietnamese restaurant. His name was Gary Pruitt, mid-40s, the kind of man who wore the same brand of plain white t-shirt every day and kept his workspace so clean it made you nervous. He locked the front door behind me when I came in. His hands were shaking slightly. I noticed, not the hands of a man who shook easily. I should have reported this a year ago. He said, "I've been afraid. I want you to understand that before I show you anything." He pulled up a laptop. The footage was time-stamped and organized into folders by date. He had been watching it in pieces. He said, "For months." He showed me the first clip. The camera angle was from the basement utility room, mounted high near the ceiling, partially obscured behind a pipe, but angled downward at the far corner. The resolution was clear enough. It showed a door, heavy, metal-framed, with a sliding bolt on the outside. Derek walked into frame on the recording. He was carrying a paper bag, grocery items. It looked like he slid the bolt, opened the door, set the bag inside, said something, and left. He didn't wait. He didn't look back. Gary fast-forwarded. He showed me a second clip. Different date. Same angle. This time the door opened from the inside before Derek arrived. A hand reached through the gap. Fingers closing around the door frame. Feeling the edge. Then Derek's footsteps came down the stairs and the hand pulled back inside and the door closed from within. Keep watching, Gary said quietly. In the third clip, the basement door was open and the light inside was on. For 4 seconds, maybe 5, a woman stood in the doorway. She was thin. Too thin. Her hair was long and unwashed. She was looking up the stairs. Then she heard something and stepped back, and the door swung shut. I knew that posture. I knew the way she stood with her left shoulder slightly forward. The habit she'd had since she was 9 years old, after she broke her collarbone falling off a horse at her cousin's farm. I knew the shape of her even from a grainy basement camera at 40 feet away. That's my daughter, I said. My voice came out like something that had been sitting in a drawer for 2 years and forgotten how to work properly. Gary nodded. She's been in that room the whole time. Mr. Callahan. Based on what I've seen on the system, she never left. The texts from her phone, the car that supposedly disappeared, all of it happened after she stopped appearing on camera upstairs. Whatever story he told about her leaving, she didn't leave. She's been down there. 2 years. 2 years while I buried her memory quietly in the back of my mind. 2 years while I sat at Margaret's side in her final months and felt grateful at least that she still believed Claire was out there somewhere. Free. Just needing time. 2 years while Derek brought me casseroles after Margaret died and called me on Sundays and told me he prayed for Claire every night. I sat in Gary's shop for a long time without speaking. Why didn't you go to the police? I asked finally. He looked at the table. Because I'm not supposed to have access to that system anymore. The moment I hand this footage to a detective, I have to explain how I got it. My company could sue me. I could lose my license. I've been trying to figure out the right way to do this without destroying my life in the process. He met my eyes. I'm sorry. I know that's not what you want to hear, but I'm telling you now because you moved in there and she's right below you and I couldn't keep watching and do nothing. I understood something then that I hadn't understood in 35 years of accounting work. Numbers were clean. They followed rules. People were something else entirely. Gary had been carrying this alone out of fear. And his fear had cost my daughter time she would never get back. I didn't say that to him. I needed him. I need copies of everything. I said, and I need you to be willing to stand behind this when the time comes. He handed me a flash drive without hesitation. I made that for you the day I called. I drove back to Derek's house. It was 10 in the morning. Derek left for work at 7:30 and came home between 5:30 and 6. I had time. I sat in the kitchen for a few minutes with my hands flat on the table. The way I used to sit before I started working through a complicated audit. I needed to think clearly. I needed to not be a father for the next 20 minutes. I needed to be the man who followed trails. The basement door was off the kitchen. Standard hollow core with a simple push-button lock that took me 30 seconds to pop with a flathead screwdriver from the junk drawer. The stairs were wooden, unfinished, and I went down slowly. Not from caution, but because my knees have not been reliable since I turned 60. The basement was divided. The main room held the water heater, the furnace, storage shelves with paint cans and holiday bins. The far wall had a second door. The one from the footage, metal framed. The bolt was thrown. I stood in front of that door, and for a moment I could not make myself reach for the bolt. Because if I was wrong, if the footage showed something I had misread, if that woman in the doorway was not Claire, then I was a man losing his grip on things and I would have nowhere left to stand. And if I was right, then the past 2 years of my life had a shape to them I was not ready to see all at once. I threw the bolt and opened the door. The smell hit me first. Not filth exactly, but the accumulated air of a room with no windows. the flatness of recycled breath and fabric that has been slept on too long. The light inside was off. I reached along the wall and found a switch. It was a finished room, maybe 10 by 12. A daybed with folded blankets. A small bookshelf. A mini refrigerator humming in the corner. A folding table with a laptop. Closed. A bathroom. Just a toilet and sink. No door. Curtained with a shower rod and a bedsheet. It had been designed to be livable. Just barely. In the way that a cage is designed to keep something alive without giving it any reason to feel alive. She was sitting on the daybed with her back against the wall, and her knees drawn up and her eyes on the door. She'd heard the bolt. She'd been waiting. She was thinner than I had prepared myself for. Her hair was cut short now. Blunt and uneven. Done by herself clearly. And it made her look different enough that for 2 full seconds, she looked like a stranger. Then she blinked and I saw Margaret in her eyes, the exact way I had always seen Margaret in her eyes. That particular shade of gray-green that ran in Margaret's family and nowhere else. "Dad," she said. The word came out cracked and small, like she hadn't used it in a very long time, and wasn't sure it still worked. I crossed the room and sat on the edge of the daybed, and I put my arms around her, and she flinched. Just slightly. Before she let herself lean in. I felt her shoulder blades beneath my hands like the folded wings of something that had forgotten it once knew how to fly. "I'm grateful you're still here with me. I want you to hear what she told me next. Because it explains everything. And it's the part that the police alone could never have untangled. Claire had been down there for 26 months. Derek had built the room 11 months before she disappeared from view. During a renovation he'd told her was a home gym. She hadn't understood the metal door at the time. She'd found out what it was for on a Tuesday night when they argued about money, and he'd walked her down here and closed the bolt from the outside and left her until morning. The first time, she thought it was a one-time thing. A horrible one-time thing. She convinced herself. The second time lasted 4 days. By the time she understood what was happening to her, Derek had already begun the other construction. The paper trail. He had documents going back 18 months. Showing Claire had withdrawn large amounts of cash from their joint accounts. He had a letter in her handwriting, because he'd had her write it under one of her first imprisonments, saying she was leaving and didn't want to be contacted. He had digital records of searches made from her laptop for bus routes, for cities in other states, for rental apartments. He had manufactured a woman who had chosen to disappear, and the evidence was thorough enough that even a competent detective might have believed it. "If I ran," Claire said, "and someone found me, he told me what would happen. He had a man, someone he paid, who would say Claire had borrowed money from him and run. He had copies of wire transfers that looked like they came from my accounts. He said I would go to prison for fraud, and he would walk free, and there would be no one left to tell the truth." She pressed her forehead briefly against my shoulder. "And then Mom got sick. And I couldn't." Her voice broke. "I couldn't put you through any more. I thought if I just waited long enough, something would change. I stayed with her for 40 minutes. I told her I was going to get her out of this. I told her about Gary's footage. I told her about the flash drive. I watched something shift in her face when I mentioned it. A door opening somewhere behind her eyes. She was still sharp. She'd spent 2 years reading every book Derek brought down, and thinking through the same problem from every angle. She knew what evidence she needed. He keeps everything in a locked filing cabinet in his office," she said. "Top drawer. Left side. The key is on his car key ring. The small brass one next to the Honda key. She had watched him often enough through the gap under the door when he worked down here beside her, that she had memorized his habits the way a prisoner memorizes the guard's schedule. There are folders in there with everything. The fake wire transfers, copies of the letter in my handwriting, the cash withdrawal records." She grabbed my wrist. "If you can photograph those, there's a paper trail going both ways. And it proves he built this, not me." I went upstairs, Found a bobby pin in Margaret's old travel bag I'd packed without thinking when I moved, and spent 18 minutes opening a filing cabinet lock the same way. I'd opened one in an evidence room in 1998 when I was consulting on a fraud case in Cincinnati, and the detective had misplaced the key. Some skills stay with you. I photographed everything. The folders were labeled in Derek's handwriting. Neat and organized. The records of a man who trusted his system so completely he hadn't thought to hide it better. Wire transfers. A lease agreement for an apartment in Pittsburgh in Claire's name. Signed with her signature. Dated the week she disappeared. For an apartment she had never set foot in. A life insurance policy for Claire. Taken out 4 months before her disappearance. For a substantial amount. With Derek as the sole beneficiary. The policy had never paid out because Claire's body had never been found. Because Claire had never died. Because Derek was waiting. I photographed everything twice. I went back downstairs. I told Claire I had what we needed. I told her I was coming back for her tonight. She shook her head. Not tonight. If he comes home and finds anything out of place, if he notices the cabinet has been disturbed, he'll move me. He's done it before. There's another location. I don't know where. Her hands were tight on my arms. You need to go to the police with everything first. A real detective. Not just a patrol officer. Someone senior enough to get a warrant tonight. And you need to come back with them. Not alone. She held my eyes. Promise me. Don't come back here without them. I promised. I kissed the top of her head the way I had when she was 7 years old and sick with fever. Then I went upstairs. Replaced the lock on the filing cabinet as closely as I could. Relocked the basement door. And sat in the kitchen for 2 minutes to let my hands stop shaking. Then I drove to the Columbus Division of Police and asked to speak to a detective who handled missing persons. The detective's name was Sims. She was 40 or so. Methodical. The kind of person who writes in a notebook with a real pen and doesn't start talking until the other person finishes. I laid everything on her desk. The flash drive. The photographs. Gary Pruitt's name and shop address. The insurance policy. The lease agreement for the Pittsburgh apartment that never was. I told her about Claire's car. I told her about the texts. I told her about the therapist's letter. I told her everything I had photographed and everything Claire had told me. Detective Sims looked at the flash drive. She looked at the photographs. She picked up her phone and made a call. 4 hours later, I was in a police vehicle, parked half a block from Derek's house when his car turned into the driveway. I watched him go inside. I watched the lights come on in the kitchen. Normal? Routine? He had no idea what the next hour held. The warrant had come through at 4:15. 2 detectives and a uniformed officer went to the door at 5:52. I waited in the vehicle the way Detective Sims had told me to, because my going in would complicate the scene. She'd said, and I understood her reasoning. Even though every part of me wanted to be the one to walk through that door, Derek answered. I could see it from down the street. The porch light on. His posture shifting when he saw the badges. He stepped back. The officers went in. For 8 minutes, nothing visible happened. Then the lights in the basement window came on. Detective Sims opened the car door. Mr. Callahan, you can come now. Claire was standing in the front doorway, wrapped in a blanket one of the officers had brought from upstairs. She was standing on the porch in the November air, with her face turned upward slightly, like she was checking whether the sky was real. I crossed the lawn in the dark and she stepped toward me off the porch and I caught her. Derek was in handcuffs in the living room. He looked at me when I came through the door with Claire. He didn't say anything for a moment. Then he said, very quietly, the way you say something, you've rehearsed, for a contingency you hoped would never happen. She was unstable. Robert, she was. You know what Margaret always said about her moods? It was the last tactic he had left. He used my dead wife against me in the same room where he was being arrested for imprisoning my living daughter. I looked at him the way I had looked at the numbers on certain audit reports over the years. And the ones where the falsification was so brazen, it almost became its own kind of confession. I know exactly what Margaret said about Claire. I told him. She said she was the bravest person in our family. I turned away from him. I didn't look at him again. The case moved through the system over the following months. Derek's attorneys argued coercion, mental health, a dozen angles. The insurance policy was damaging. Gary Pruitt testified, and his footage, combined with the filing cabinet records and the landlord in Pittsburgh who had never met Claire in person but had received a signed lease by mail, built a case that the prosecution called among the cleaner kidnapping and fraud matters they had handled in years. Derek was convicted on all primary counts. The sentence was 22 years. The Pittsburgh landlord, when contacted, cooperated immediately and was appalled. The insurance company launched its own investigation and filed a separate civil suit. The therapist who had provided the letter about Claire's mental health history later told investigators she had provided a general letter to Derek for what he said were insurance purposes and had no knowledge of how it was being used. She came forward before she was subpoenaed. Claire came to stay with me. Not at Derek's house, which I left the same week she was found. We rented a small house in Bexley, near enough to Columbus that she could get to her appointments, far enough from Westerville that neither of us had to drive past anything that reminded us of those years. The first week, she slept with the window open, regardless of the temperature. I asked her about it once. She said she just wanted to hear outside sounds when she woke up. Leaves, cars, rain if it came. Something that confirmed she was somewhere that had a world attached to it. She started physical therapy in December. A nutritionist helped her work back toward a healthy weight over several months. She was in therapy twice a week, with a psychologist in Clintonville who specialized in prolonged captivity. Some weeks were harder than others. There were nights she called me from her room at 2 a.m, not saying much. Just talking. Just keeping the sound of another person in the room with her until she could fall asleep. I never once minded. I kept my phone on the nightstand and I answered every time. Hadfirm, where she had worked in financial compliance before her disappearance. Reached out 6 months after she was found. They had never formally closed her employment file. They said they would like to have her back when and if she felt ready. That her position had been filled in her absence, but that they had room for her expertise in another capacity. That they had not stopped thinking about her. She read that email 3 times in my kitchen and didn't say anything for a while. They kept my parking spot. She said finally. I don't know why I find that so funny. In the fall, more than a year after everything, we went back to Dayton together for the first time. We stood at Margaret's grave on a cool October afternoon with leaves coming down around us. I had thought about what I would feel standing there with Claire. Whether there would be something painful in knowing that Margaret had died, not knowing Claire was alive and close. There is, I don't think that goes away. But there is also this, Margaret died, believing her daughter was free somewhere, moving through a world without walls. And whatever else was taken from her, that was not. She was spared the truth. I have decided to be grateful for that. Not because it's easy, but because it's the choice that lets me keep breathing. I want to say something to you now. Whoever you are watching this, not as a father, not as a man with a story to tell, but as a person who spent 35 years assuming that because I was good at finding lies on paper, I could recognize them in people too. I could not. I sat across from Derek at holidays and birthday dinners for years. I watched him open car doors for Claire and remembered her anniversaries and make small talk with Margaret about her garden. I saw everything he showed me, and I missed everything he hid. That is not stupidity. That is what very deliberate deception looks like. It has a face you recognize. It brings food to the table and knows your family's favorite songs. If someone in your life has disappeared and the explanation feels thin, trust that feeling, not because every disappearance is what mine was, but because the cost of asking harder questions is small and the cost of not asking them is something I cannot fully put into words. The people who love you will understand why you're asking. The people who don't want you to ask are telling you something. If someone comes to you with something that sounds impossible, Something that requires you to believe your son-in-law imprisoned your daughter in a basement for 2 years. Sit with it before you decide it cannot be true. I almost didn't go to Gary Pruitt's shop. I almost told myself it was a crank call. The only reason I went was that I had nothing left to lose, and something in his voice reminded me of the way men sound when they are carrying something too heavy. Don't sign things you haven't read. I know you've heard that. I know it sounds obvious. Derek had me sign a document I didn't understand in the first month after Margaret died. When I was exhausted and trusting and grateful for someone who seemed to be holding things together, that document complicated the early stages of the case. Read what is put in front of you. Every page. And know this age does not mean you cannot fight. I am 63 years old. I opened a filing cabinet with a bobby pin and a dead woman's traveling bag. I drove to a police station and laid evidence on a detective's desk and sat in a car half a block from the scene and waited. I was not fast. I was not certain. But I was there and I kept moving, and that turned out to be enough. I almost let fear talk me into the easier version of events 2 years ago. I almost settled for the story that said Claire was struggling. Claire was difficult. Claire had finally done something impulsive and permanent and sad. It was easier than the alternative. Easier for me. Easier for everyone. The easier story would have left my daughter in a room with a bolted door until the man who locked it decided he was done waiting. She is sitting in my living room right now as I record this. She has a mug of coffee and a book, and she is sitting in the good chair by the window, the one that gets the morning light. And she keeps looking up at the yard outside the way people do when they are still getting used to the fact that they can. That image is the thing I will carry out of this year. Not the basement. Not the handcuffs. That image. The coffee mug and the morning light and my daughter looking at a yard. Sometimes love does not look like anything dramatic. Sometimes it looks like answering a phone call from a number you don't recognize and deciding to trust the voice on the other end. Sometimes it looks like driving to a shop on Morse Road and sitting down across from a frightened man and saying, "Show me everything." I would make that drive 1,000 times. So I want to ask you something before I go. Has there ever been a moment in your life when you had to choose between believing the easy version of a story and the version that would cost you everything to pursue? I'd really like to hear about it in the comments. And if this story meant something to you, please share it with someone who might need to hear it today. Like and subscribe if you believe that truth is always worth finding. No matter how long it takes, no matter how deep you have to go to reach it, because I promise you, from the other side of it, it is worth every single thing the search costs you. Take care of the people you love. Check on them when something feels wrong. Believe them when they say they need help, even when the person telling you otherwise seems trustworthy. The lock on that basement door was simple. What kept my daughter behind it for 2 years was not iron or steel. It was a story, carefully maintained, that everyone around her found easier to believe than the truth. Stories can be rewritten. I know that now, and the pen belongs to whoever is willing to pick it up and start